Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're about to start our panel on AI ethics and what are the best ways to use AI for the common good. Our panelists include Mr. Konstantin Cvetanov, Senior Solutions Architect of Enterprise AI Software with NVIDIA, Brock Davis, Principal Engineering Manager, Microsoft, Dr. Jennifer Esposito, the Chair of Educational Policy Studies, Scott Kent, Principal of the FCS Innovative Academy, Dr. Renata Rawlings-Goss, Executive Director, the South Big Data Innovation Hub, and our moderator and leader of Arctic, Dr. Suranga. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Scott. So, thank you, everyone, for participating in this panel. I think to start with, let's define what's AI, right? So, what's your view and what's your definition of AI? That will give us a good starting point. Brock.
I mean, you're looking at me. You want me to answer this question first?
I mean, yeah, we can provide our.
Sure. I think AI is, in my opinion, now that it's more mainstream, it's whatever the general public thinks it is, because it has a lot of weight behind it. But I mean, my personal thoughts are it's exactly what it sounds like. It's artificially generated intelligence. Right now, where we're at is it's based on what software engineers make it. But yeah, I have a very basic definition for it.
Quick check. Okay, this works. Yeah, if we want to dig a little bit deeper into sort of the technical definition of it, the way I would define it is a set of models that we define as neural networks that are trained to do specific tasks that otherwise are done by humans, right? So automating specific tasks, things like recognizing patterns within images, things like predicting next items in a conversation, things like doing translation, things like robotics, and also generating entirely net new content all on its own. AI is not really a new concept, to be honest. It's been around since the 1950s, right? A lot of people don't realize that, yes, now it's become mainstream, but the concept of artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence research actually started in the 50s. And the term neural network was coined in the 50s as well, and it was meant to essentially mimic the way neurons in the human brain are interconnected and operate. And that is really the base foundation. Now, it's not exactly the same thing, but it's loosely modeled after the human brain. However, that idea at the time wasn't really developed, and it didn't really get anywhere because we had, well, bigger problems to solve, right? We had the internet was just in its early stages. We had to solve that. Computers were just really, really big calculators, right? That's really what they were. And so we had bigger fish to fry at the time, and getting, to the point where, 60, now almost 70 years later, we have the compute power, the infrastructure, and the human talent to be able to not only develop, but also train and run these neural networks on massive compute clusters that we just never had in the past. So this is one of the reasons why AI has become a reality today for many people. It's that we actually have the infrastructure to run it and the talent to develop it. Versus 50 years ago, it was still very theoretical.
That's not allowed.
That wasn't prepared at all.
Nice. I agree. I actually have this conversation a lot about what is AI. So the way I describe it is there are some things computers are good at and some things that people are good at. And there are a different set of those things. And so computers are very good at big number calculations typically. But humans are very good at recognizing images, way better than machines in most cases. You can pick any toddler and flash 10 pictures and they'll be like cat, dog, fish. But a computer is typically not programmed or good at doing that type of fast image recognition. And so one form of AI, just like you said, is image recognition, and what it takes for a computer to be able to recognize images as well as a toddler, can. And it is incredibly hard to get computers to do that. And there are other things we do really well. You just start at the top. Eyes, we do much better. We also have a better sense of touch, of what things are touched. So this is what we're trying to mimic with sensors, Internet of Things, all these types of things. We have a much more developed sense of processing the written word. Now computers with natural language processing is a whole other subcategory of AI. So AI is this bucket of things that are all different, really different fields, because somebody can spend their whole career just working on the image problem, right? And then robotics is a field of AI. And so when people think AI, they sometimes get what I call the Terminator model, where they envision a robot with perfect mental clarity and human-like functions and emotions, and they can recognize images and they can compute as well as a computer. But really and honestly, we are in different lanes. The people who work on imaging are one group. The people who work on, trying to make robotics, the people that are working on sensor and sensor detection for touch are totally different groups at this point. And so I find it helpful to say that because people dump AI in a bucket like it's all one thing. And then machine learning is trying to replicate how we think. And some of the things people do better than computers at thinking is pattern recognition. So machine learning is essentially a lot of pattern recognition. And that's what the neural nets are trying to do, and that's what all of the things are trying to do to get the computer to recognize patterns that you would probably recognize if you, looked at a thing long enough. The difference is we're trying to bridge together what people are good at and what computers are good at. And what people are good at is pattern recognition on a small scale. Like if you have 6 things and you want to know what's the pattern in those 6 things, you can go around to every person in here and everybody will be able to tell you the pattern. 3 of them are red, 3 of them are yellow, right? This is the pattern. Some of them are big, some of them are square. We can do that. The problem is when you have to pick out a pattern and now you have big data, which means now instead of 3 circles, you have 2 million. Pick the pattern. That's when we get not good at it, right? And so that's where, in those situations, AI makes a lot of good sense because we want to try to mimic something we could do. The same problem happens if you're an HR director and you're used to getting 50 resumes for a job. If all of a sudden you start getting 3,000 resumes for 4,000, 10,000, 50,000. Now who's reading all of those? How much time does that take? Now AI makes sense for you, right? Because it's just unfeasible to do. So I preface that because I think it's connected to big data and data science in the sense that it's about scale. It makes no sense to create an AI to determine a pattern of 6 things. You have wasted your time. Get a person, get a grad student, and look at the 6 things, But if you're gonna have 10,000, a million things, it makes sense to put in the effort to create a neural network that can try to scale that process faster. So that's where I see AI. I see it as a useful way to scale up some of the things we already do well. But we have to, find ways for us to understand what it's then telling us at these big levels so that we can do what we're good at, which is process and pattern recognition with the AI.
I'm so glad you guys, all of the people in field went first so that I can skate this answer and give a very different one. So as a principal of a high school, a STEM high school, what I would say is AI for me is a revolutionary set of tools that is both going to potentially save the educational system for us, and one that might ruin it. So it's a double-edged sword for us. I think, when we look at technology, and we've been struggling with this, the integration of technology in a very staid academic bureaucracy, that the transition of change has been so fast, we've really struggled to keep up with it. And AI, in my mind, is a sea change for us, because no longer is it really technology providing access or quick access to information, but it actually gives the students the opportunity to offload the reasoning that they do, and internally, and is so integral in being successful in our society. So for me, what I see is us at a pivot point, and AI really being that element that is forcing us to look at how we educate our students, what is the most important to us in a world that is going to be revolutionized by artificial intelligence and all the things that it can bring to us. All of the great benefits and all of the concerns that we have for it, I think, are really important elements for us to consider as we go through.
Thank you. I'm also from the educational space, and so I am glad that the technical definition is out of the way. I look at AI as a pedagogical tool. So one of the things that interests me about it is how can K-12 teachers and faculty in higher education use it to teach with, and how can students use it to learn with and from? And so I think if we're going to incorporate it into the educational space, then we need some guardrails around it, some policies that enable it to be used for the common good, not to cheat, not to plagiarize, whatever else it's capable of, which I assume they know. I don't even know what's to come. But I do think that ethically, educators, leaders need to start thinking about this now, because students are using it. They're doing all kinds of things with it.
Okay, that's really nice. I have completely different view AI. So it's artificial intelligence, right? So I think anything automation is AI, the way that I see it, right? It's a different level. But it is AI because it's intelligent doing things its own, right? So we have been doing like any computer program that can do things like simulations, games. That's kind of AI. It can run an agent itself, and it does things by its own. Now we are coming into the age like you have general AI, right? You can do like higher level tasks. You can think, you can recognize things. Those are the new things happening. But if you think about that, I think 1990s, you had games that can play with you, right? So in that, thought, you work on Minecraft, right? You're a game person. So how things change in the gaming industry, and then what might come?
So you guys can hear me okay? So like Suranga mentioned, I'm an engineering manager for Minecraft. So a lot of the things he was talking about with AI and some of the things like that is not really what we're using AI for Minecraft, if anyone's played it. More to Suranga's point, like in gaming, since games were a thing, you'd use AI for pathfinding. You have a bad guy who's following the main player around, or they have goals. I need to seek out this player to inflict damage or something like that. And so one of the things we're using now is how do we make that AI more challenging for players who want a more challenging gaming experience, so that it can think a little bit more quickly, so that when the player does a thing, it can react in real time versus like having a sort of determined path. So we think about that within context of Minecraft. But outside of that, there's also parts of AI, the more new and shiny things of like, okay, I'm an artist and I need to make a bunch of new things. How much do I want to spend my time handcrafting pixel art versus maybe I can generate some images that give me a baseline and then I can fine tune it. And so there's different parts of it. Like how do we use AI to make the game more challenging and interesting? And then there's how do we use AI to make our job as software engineers or game designers or artists more efficient? And then how do we do it so that the game is still authentic, like has a human touch and doesn't feel like, oh, this is just like this game and that game and that game and that game. So I think it's an interesting time for gaming and AI. I think it's going to create a lot of really fun experiences for people. I think it's going to, hopefully, I think this is probably what my leadership is hoping for, is we can make things faster so that we can get more things out to players so they stay engaged and we continue to be the #1 game of all time. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where it is with gaming right now.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's good. So, gaming. I remember I was a gamer when I was a kid. I was waiting for new NVIDIA or whatever GPU to come out so that you can play that game, faster, nicely. So I think NVIDIA played a really pivotal role to bring the AI that happening these days a reality, right? So, Konstantin, it's for you. So, what has changed? And I mean, what has changed, and then what's going to happen in the future?
Sure. So first, I think it makes sense for me to take you on a bit of a history journey here. NVIDIA was founded about 30 years ago, and the first 10 years, we were pretty much only working on trying to get out a single chip to the market. At the time, technologies like 3D APIs like OpenGL and other technologies that were targeting sort of 2D and potentially some 3D rendering were just on the ascendancy, right? And so with gaming, it turns out that what happens is when you are rendering a whole bunch of characters and scenes all at the same time, it becomes a very computationally intensive task. And I'm going to get back to that because there is a common denominator there between machine learning, high-performance computing, data analytics, and gaming, right? And 3D rendering. And it's the fact that we can break down tasks of linear algebra into smaller tasks and then execute those smaller tasks on a much larger number of cores. And that's what really made NVIDIA really sort of famous back in the day with the first GeForce cards that came out late 90s, early 2000s. But the point there is that the drawing of complex characters and scenes in real time with really good visual effects, it turns out that we can apply the same principles to things like machine learning, computer vision, and NLP, right? And again, it's the parallel computing mechanism, and we call it CUDA, which stands for Computing Unified Device Architecture, and that's the programming language and set of APIs that's at the foundation of what we call parallel computing or accelerated computing. And that's true for game development, and it's true for professional visualization tasks within engineering and architecture, and it's also true for machine learning, deep learning, and data analytics. All of those things for us, those use cases, are connected by that web, that set of foundational APIs called CUDA. And so for 20 years, right, we've been working on developing the CUDA stack. We are now at our 12th iteration of the CUDA toolkit, so it's become pretty mature. But that's all to say that the way we think of solving complex computational tasks, whether it's gaming, rendering, or AI, ML, HPC, is by parallelizing those data sets and those models, right? And taking a linear algebra problem and actually distributing it across multiple accelerators or multiple cores, right? And so I promise I'm not here to pitch my product, but I'm going to show you what a graphics processing unit looks like, right? And this is NVIDIA's A40 GPU. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that it doesn't have a fan like a normal GeForce card in your PC that you use for gaming. And that's because this happens to be a server card, right? And servers take their power and cooling from the server motherboard in the data center, right? But the principle is the same. So you have a chip inside or multiple chips that run that we call CUDA cores, right? And those CUDA cores can take a mathematical task and accelerate it, right? And so if a normal computer processor that we call CPU has 2, 4, 8, 16, 32 cores, right? This GPU here has north of 10,000 CUDA cores, right? So compare 16, 32 to 10,000. Now that's not to say that, you know, I'm going to stick a GPU in every computer and I'm going to run every single task, including your notepad on a GPU, because that wouldn't make any sense. CPUs are great at what they do for sequential tasks. But for parallel tasks is what we call a GPU and what we combine with our CUDA developer stack and our foundational developer model. So just wanted to kind of give a little bit of a brief history lesson there, because what we did is we still are very much serve the gaming community and we love the gaming community. But about 20 years ago, we actually saw researchers at universities like Georgia State that were using these GPUs for what we called at the time GPU, right? General purpose computing. And so with general purpose computing, they were trying to run these non-standard, right, non-gaming tasks onto these GPUs. And then the idea occurred of, hey, you know what, let's make it easier by providing, you know, APIs, libraries, drop-in replacements, right, OpenACC directives for the HPC folks in the room, and things like that to be able to make it easier to program on these things, make them programmable and make them extensible. And it just so happens that the era of AI just kind of hit us in the face, right? And it became really a perfect use case for us to develop and to invest in, because at the very core, because it's so computationally intensive and complex, it is a good use case for parallel computing and data parallelism.
Yeah, under the hood, it's solved in linear equation, both.
Exactly.
Gaming linear equation.
Yes.
AI linear equation. So,
Quick response.
okay.
Sorry. Another interesting point to kind of go back to, I think, what you said, and this with gaming is, so again, Minecraft, not a graphically impressive game, right? It's blocks. We run on everything from Xbox Series X, which is really impressive, to your low-end Android device. And so where we're using a lot of interesting things, AI is not actually in the game, but looking at patterns and how people use the game to figure out what to spend our resources on, what to spend the compute power on. And so, like in game development, sometimes you're not throwing cores and power because that's not going to fit in a Switch, right, or a Android device. So you have limited things. You don't want the thing to catch on fire as someone's playing. So you figure out, like, you use the data telemetry from the game, using those large patterns to look at, like, okay, how are players engaging? And then you figure out, okay, I have a limited number of cores, a limited number of compute power. What do I care about in the game? Is it more intelligent mobs? Is it rendering further out in the world? Is it dynamic world generation? What is it? So just to tie those things
I mean,
together.
it's really good transition. My next question, because now if you think about this, it is intelligent, right? So we used to train model like using machine learning, right? It's we have little data, and then we use machine learning to train them and get some insight, right? And then this deep learning, like neural network, is not something that invented in 20s, like 2020s. It's like way back, it's 1960s, right? But nothing happened. It became a reality due to two things. One is the computation power. The next one is the data, right? So I know that, Renata, you are a data person. You run Big Data Hub. So how do you see that, how data play a role in this transition, and what data types and what is going to happen in the future?
Yeah, so I think it goes together. AI, now this is my own opinion, is a subfield of data science in a way, because it means in order for these machine learning things to work, you have to train them. And the way you train them is with giving them a lot of examples of what happened in the past. There's other ways, but the primary way is you say, okay, I'm going to give you 10,000 pictures of different types of cats. And now I want you to be able to determine a cat when you see it, no matter if it's upside down or backwards or flipped up or brown or black or striped or whatever. And so you need a database of, 1 million pictures of cats. Now we have that. That's called the internet, And so, but you need that in a lot of different subfields to make it work in those subfields. So you can't just put a neural network in an area where you have very little data and it's uncertain and it's not precise and you don't really have a good way of telling the machine, training it what's good and what's bad. I mean, we're trying to develop, that's where AI is trying to go. Can we use these smaller data sets to infer? Can we bring in other information? There's a lot of different iterations to try to solve these problems, but in general, the best way is to have a lot of data. And so that's why you say the two things have to go together. You need a lot of data to be able to train a model very well. And if you get a lot of data and you got a lot of training, then you need computing power that can handle it to be able to do that computation over and over again. So I don't think they are the same ecosystem in a lot of ways, and they need to be as we move forward. But all three are accelerating very quickly. And that's where I think one other thing humans are not as good at is change as computers are. So we don't change at the speed that new things become adoptive and the ability to do new things. So the ability to process, I actually was in a conference this week with the director of the Oak Ridge National Labs, and they were saying they're doing computation where they have 40,000 of those, and they use it to process things, and they're trying to get to zeta scale. So if there's 10,000 on this one, they have that times 40,000, and they're trying to pick out, use AI or use intern and huge amounts of data, because they get access to they're doing geospatial, but they now have access to all of NASA's data, all of NOAA's data, every weather satellite, and 40,000 of those. And now they do the machine learning. So to try to model things at a complexity or try to pick out particular materials that we need for solar power generation, to try to pick out what we're going to do for climate. So I think this growth in computing, this growth in AI technology, the growth in data really are what's pushing everything faster and faster. And so fast, in fact, his main concern now was energy. This is where we're going to get to energy, where they want to get to zeta scale computing, but in order to do that, they would need to build their own nuclear reactor just to fund that, just to cool that one computer. And so he's like, we're not going to do that. We need energy efficient AI. We need something that won't take up as much computing power. So that's where it kind of cycles back to the academic institutions, to industry, to try to feed the ability to scale, and then us to try to trust it, to try to understand it, to change our systems, to change our institutions. That's going to take a lot longer than figuring this problem out.
Yeah, it sure do. So fast forward, right? So we had enough computing power. We had enough data. Now we are at the point that these generative algorithm can generate stuff. They can write essays, they can generate pictures, they can, answer questions. So high school students, they can cheat now.
Yeah, yes, they can.
Right. So, so what's your take on the effects of AI on school systems?
I mean, it's a huge thing. So, my school is part of the Fulton County School Systems, and we've got a coalition together to try to work through this and figure it out, because we realize how incredibly dramatic this change is going to be. It might surprise you to know, but students were actually cheating before AI also. And I think what really this is doing is it's bringing into sharp focus the need to adapt how we teach. So, we talk a lot at my school about, if it's Googleable, it's probably not the right question for the test. So those questions, you need to have more engaged, application questions than what we have. So the problem with AI is that it is able to provide them those answers. And so it really is causing us to look back at how we engage and how we support our students through this process. It's an incredible tool. And, there's a scale of uses for it, whether a student is using using ChatGPT to write their essay, or to generate ideas for their essay, or to do research, or to put in the essay that they wrote and then get support back from it of how they can change it. So it's this incredible tool set that is changing the way that we approach education. My big fear is the time that humans take to change, and so changing the way we teach in our classrooms is really hard. And, I think back on, so I'm guessing everybody in here had English class at some point. Who in here read all of the novels that were assigned to you in high school? Oh, I love you guys. That's great. That's awesome. But it's a small group. Yeah. So, this is already a problem that we see, and AI is just bringing it into sharp focus because the tool is so readily available to them. And it's so easy to hide behind that tool. So we have to really think as a community of educators, what do we do to make it so that our students are engaged in that learning process when they do have tools that if we maintain that traditional educational model, they have tools that can circumvent all of it. And I would suggest that if they have a tool that can help them circumvent everything that the education system is supposed to be doing, we're doing the wrong thing. So we have to really spend some time reevaluating what it is that we're doing, how we are engaging students, what are those skills that are going to be, beneficial to them in a world that's changing so fast, I can't predict. I have parents ask me, what their kids should be doing to prepare for college or the workforce after it. And the horizon for that is shrinking so dramatically. And truthfully, right now, maybe you guys know in field, if y'all could tell me afterwards, that would be great. But it's shrinking so fast that I don't know what to tell them. And so then the question is, if we are moving into an uncertain future, how do we leverage that technology so that they are not using it to teach, but to develop those skills that they need? And that if we can get to that by the end of the day, that would just be awesome for me.
We'll try. So I think it's not a bad tool. It's a very powerful tool, right? It's a matter of how well we can use it, right? And then the other thing is how well it's going to be accessible to everyone, right? So I know you are on policy space. So what should we do to make schools use these tools correctly, and then how can we make them accessible to everyone?
The notion of correctly, I think, would be contested depending on who you ask. And so, I can think of the higher ed space. So in my department, I have some faculty who are requiring their undergraduates to handwrite responses. And so, similar to what you're saying, people are slow to change, right? So I'm going to try to circumvent this tool, and instead of allowing students to use it or allowing myself to, think of ways I can apply it in the classroom, I'm going to force students to avoid it by going back and handwriting things. So I think it will depend on people's comfortability with the tool, with technology, and with the unknown. I mean, all of us are grappling with what does this mean for the future? How do we prepare, especially high school and college students? How do we prepare our graduate students to navigating this? As far as accessibility, I mean, that's been a problem. We saw it especially during the pandemic when schools shut down and learning went remote. Well, who were the kids who had a good experience with learning from home? It was kids who had access to technology. It was children who had parents who could be home and who could, monitor what they were doing, who could help basically teach the content. So I don't have the answers in terms of accessibility, but I do think that K-12 schools, higher ed, it's something that we should be doing now. We should be developing programs. We should be developing courses that help students learn how to navigate the tool, how to use it, and how to use it for the common good.
Yes, go ahead.
So I think this is going to be forced even faster just because of the new executive orders that have come out, that now it requires every school in Georgia to have a data science program for all grades, K-12. And so this is something that we'd really like to help school systems, I think, engage and think through, because there are implications, and like you said, the word correct is subjective, and so thinking about what's correct for your school system, what's correct for your school, what's correct for your classroom, because implementation is all. You can make a policy, and if teachers disagree, then who's there in the classroom? The teachers, right? And so I think all of these things that were theoretical or kind of in the realm of science or academia, we're gonna have to grapple with the idea of fifth graders using these tools, and we can't say that we just want them to use it in an educated way. It's like they are fifth graders, right? They're not gonna treat it like grad students. We have to figure out how to make that explainable at all levels. So just with some of the policies that are coming out, there's an AI order, there's a data science that might be coming. We're kind of behind in the US compared to other places in the world. So I could see that definitely trickling into our education system pretty soon.
Definitely. I mean, these tools are very powerful that it can be used at many scales, right? I mean, fifth grader can use it, undergraduate student can use it, industry professional can use it, right? So one area that these tools can be used is research, right? So can you give us some examples where AI can make a difference? And then what is the future?
Yeah, so by the way, I love the conversation about the schools, because I think it's very important, and one of the things that I think maybe we should think about from a regulatory standpoint is, what are some of the win-win scenarios that we can go after, right? What is some of the low-hanging fruit that isn't potentially dangerous, that we can allow and we can legislate, but we can use to benefit both students and teachers. So I'm thinking about things like grading, right? So we're not replacing the teacher, because the teacher still needs to teach, but grading is so boring, you guys. Yes. My wife is a teacher, and that is her least favorite part of the job, is grading homework or grading tests, right? Can we all agree that we can automate that for good, once and for all?
But question.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that AI can grade correctly?
Well,
like a essay, right?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because essay can be something subjective, right?
Yeah,
there's a fair bit of
it's always going to be subject
there's
to
a fair bit of creativity there, right? So maybe essays are not the low-hanging fruit, but maybe tests are. I would say, just like I say to everything else that has to do with an AI system, is it's all about how you train it, right? So the level of accuracy would depend on the field of what's acceptable. Like, for example, in healthcare research, going back to your research question, we see machine learning algorithms being trained to the tune of 95% accuracy rate, right? Which is pretty good, I would say. Even if you're a doctor, a qualified doctor with 30 years of experience, right? As a patient, would you expect that doctor to make the correct prognosis 100% of the time? Probably not, right? There's probably a little bit of wiggle room there. So definitely it's about the quality of the data. It's about the quality and the way you train those models. So some pretty high accuracies can be achieved if the data is good, right? And more importantly, if the humans in the loop, if the human operators of that training process are trained well. So that's one thing that, yeah.
So I think it's interesting, like with I think you said the executive order talked about data science classes being required. I think some of these things, to me, like, so it was mentioned earlier, AI can say cat, not a cat, not a cat, hot dog, not a hot dog, these sort of things. Yeah. But it's what's more important than like data science, I think, is can people think critically? Because these tools are amazing, but it's not new that technology has, brought in this amazing thing that legislation hasn't caught up with, K-12 hasn't maybe caught up with, university hasn't caught up with, because the technology can move faster and faster. So what was important then and continues to be important will be more important, and what industry is looking for in hires is critical thinking skills. Great, you have this amazing tool. What are you going to do with it? And so I think data science classes are important, sure, but cool, you have this thing now. What do you do with it? So I think, to your point about humans in the loop, if they can't think critically, how well can they do that job? So I think the most important thing that schools can be doing in educational policy is how do we make sure that not just are using these AI tools today well, but how do you think critically about, is it the right use case? How can I make this better? How am I making sure I'm thinking about all of these edge case things that this tool does really well by itself, but maybe I need to use this other tool that does other things. So I think that's how we use these tools for good and to make where research is, improving at higher speeds, because we're thinking critically, what are the types of things I need to think about, the questions I need to ask, the models I need, the quality of data I need to put in there to kind of train these things.
So I agree with both things. I'll give basically some examples for research and for teaching for AI. So I guess I'll start with teaching. So actually we have a institute that's part of our center that's AI for adult learning. And so they developed a AI chat bot that was named, actually one of the PIs developed it, which was named Jill Watson because it was on IBM Watson. And so they deployed it in their actual machine learning class, but didn't tell the students as a GA, so somebody that was a student teacher. So there was about 10, this class is pretty big, so it's like 1,000 students in this class. And so they have 10 graduate student teachers. 9 of them were people, 1 was Jill Watson. And she ended up at the end winning a teaching award. Because she would respond to the students' questions at 4 a.m. whenever they asked for them. And what she essentially did was not replace the curriculum, but she was trained on some of the most common questions that teachers get, which usually are found in the syllabus. Like, when is the next test? How much is this going to affect my grade? Do you know the next, like, what my average is right now? Then she started getting trained on kind of base level notes for the class. So like things that students typically ask. And then over the years, because I think she's been in the class now a couple years, she's been trained on some of the most frequently asked questions about the subject matter. So like if there's a particular test or a particular subject where every year the teacher gets like, because there's 1,000 kids, 250 kids ask the same question about, I didn't understand what this meant versus this. They try to be more specific, but also Jill can answer that question, for the people that don't come to class that day and want to ask at 3 a.m., And so in that way, she's been extremely helpful. It's an AI assistant. It's in their forum. It's basically in the, universities, they'll have like a background education management system that people can ask questions through. And that has been pretty successful. And I think it's just like this. It's not low hanging in the technology, but once things come together, it's low hanging in that it's not replacing the instructor time, but it's really freeing up some of especially for large classes, right? If you have 15 people in the class, you may not need this. Like, it's not worth your time. But if you have 1,000 people in your class, it's worth it, right? And then if she doesn't know something, she refers it to one of the real TAs, the people. She's like, oh, I'm not sure. I'll ask Susan or something. And so then they go to office hours and ask Susan or whatever. And so that's one in teaching. I would say in research, there's a lot of different ways that it can do something similar to speed up the research process. Earlier this week, I don't know if this is the best use case, but earlier this week I had a researcher say, well, I will never write the dull parts of a grant proposal ever again, she said. He said, I'll have a first draft written by ChatGPT every time. I was like, I don't know how great that is, but She was determined that that was never happening again. And so that's one way. The other way that I thought was really interesting was this same guy from Oak Ridge that has all of the computing power and other things. When you're trying to solve, a lot of part of the mission of my center is to solve these grand challenges with that we have health disparities, supply chain, but how do we leverage data science and AI and industry and government to try to do those things? And I'll say there's a quote that for every complex problem, there is an answer that is simple, clear, and wrong. And so if it's just, is AI gonna solve some of our biggest research challenges? The answer is no, but is it a part of the solution? So the answer is definitely yes. There's probably a part of your research process that could be leveraged into AI, right? It's not gonna replace your whole research entity unless you are doing something very specific. But you know, if you're trying to solve something large, what they did was, I actually just told the story at lunch, but they were looking for decarbonizing, you know, renewable energy is very important. They were looking for decarbonizing, taking carbon out of the atmosphere. And one way you can do that is directly finding a material that will bind to carbon straight out of the air. So to try to remove CO2 from the atmosphere by binding the carbon. But in that material, they do not want to also capture water because there's a lot more water in the air than there is carbon in the air. So you need to find this very particular material that can last a long time, is cheap to make, captures carbon at a very high rate, or else it's not worthless. It's worthless if it only does a little bit of carbon, but also does not bind well to water vapor. And it turns out that's a huge unknown space. It's like every molecule of atom mixed with every other molecule of atom that could make any type of material. How do you find this thing? And so they used this 40,000 GPUs, that's how much long it took, to try to model atom by atom, different molecules of atoms, and how far away they are from each other, and what possible properties they might have, to try to pick one material to range to even start doing testing. So that's the beginning of a very long pipeline of material development, but it's something that speeds up this one very time-consuming part. So I think that could be looked at in anybody's research to say, is there one spot in your research that is, you have enough data, it's very time-intensive to have a grad student or people do it, and you need a place to begin to be able to refine.
That's great. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a question about data. So I'm assuming IRBs will have to start thinking about this, because if you're feeding data into these systems, then how does that protect confidentiality, I guess? Does your data set become part of the public realm that anyone could access?
Now you've got to the thorny questions.
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
I was trying to ask a question in the same line, right? So I'm going to add to that question. So it's about two things, right? So you mentioned the adaptation, right? And then right now these AI tools being adapted by many people, right? So if you think about it, bank use this to determine your creditworthiness, right? And then law enforcement agencies use this to send the law enforcement to the different neighborhood. But the problem is these people use this as black box, right? They don't know how these models has been trained, and then what that model predict depends on what data that it use, right? So how do we make sure that these models produce correct results and then generalize enough that anyone can use it? It's a tough question, I know.
It's a very tough question. Okay, I'm gonna pass the mic after I say this. And then, so this is, we've already gotten into this 90-minute panel basically where there are a lot of stumbling blocks right here. And so one thing is anything you reuse from someone else that you were not a part of the original design of, even like software packages, you don't know how those things were coded. AI has another layer, like you say, because we're training it on certain data, that actually the implications of your questions are even bigger than what you were saying, because you could build in bias unintentionally, but also intentionally into AI models. If you were trying to be, you could say, okay, I want this AI model to be only really good at identifying black or black and white cats. So you only show it pictures of black or black and white cats. And so it comes across a tabby cat and it's like, not cat, you know, because I've never seen that thing's not a cat. And so, you know, that's obviously something, particular since people don't have a requirement of any kind of disclosing their training data to you, for you to know where those blind spots are in advance. And also on the flip side, we deal with a lot of intelligence agencies. People are thinking people can do that on purpose, you know, to say, okay, now I know that this thing won't recognize tabby cats. So if I'm going to send in a stealth cat, I'm making this up as I go along, then I'm gonna send in a tabby, right? Because I know the weaknesses of the AI and you don't, because you've used it off the shelf based on my training data. And so I think we have no infrastructure for that right now. We don't really have a good way of reporting the trustworthiness, the completeness, the truthfulness of training data. I don't think this is why people have concerns about ChatGPT, because my concern is that they're training it on the internet data, and do we really want our future to be like the internet? Mm-hmm. You know, in some way, like, that's how I feel about it. And you know, there's a lot of information there, but is that always a true representation of what we would like our fifth graders to come away with? You know, and so where those guardrails sit, and a lot of this is being developed in the context of industry and not government, where it could be regulated more easily. And the US is not a typically very industry regulation heavy. Like, they usually let industry have a much wider berth on keeping data confidential than some other places in the world. So I don't know the answer to this. I think there is definitely some policies that are needed. There's going to be some pushback on every side for what is right and what is to do. So this is the push and pull that we get with a lot of our partners.
So one of the things that we're seeing on the commercial side a lot is companies, especially large enterprises, are developing large language models and generative AI systems with very domain-specific data, right? So yes, there's a lot of things that you can do with ChatGPT. As you said, it scans the whole internet. Going back to, I think now it's January of 2022, it's the most current data. But for most enterprise use, it's really not that great, right? It's great for consumer, right? But from an enterprise standpoint, when it comes to developing AI systems for things like, you know, medical research, call centers, etc., you need data that's very, very domain specific and sometimes company specific. And maybe we could apply that to school systems as well, right? What if every school system had their own ChatGPT that's only sanctioned, right, with the data from that school system that's only allowed to use by those students and nothing else is allowed, right? So I'm thinking Fulton GPT, right? Gwinnett GPT, Forsyth GPT, right? Cherokee GPT. That sounds even better. But if maybe not every school, but every school system that had a framework in place to regulate, right, how content is generated by students and to address things like cheating, etc., can have that own in-house system in place and then find other ways to prohibit external use. So that's one idea just that I'm thinking about, just taking from the commercial side of what large organizations are doing with their own large language model systems. I think as well, the guardrails that you mentioned, Renata, that's something that is very, very ongoing as a debate right now within the tech industry, within Silicon Valley. Every company that's developing large language models, like Microsoft, like Meta, like NVIDIA, like Google, like IBM, like others, is thinking about how to provide not only guardrails for their own models, but how to provide developers, right, in the open source community, the tools to be able to put those guardrails in place whenever they are developing a more customized generative AI system like we're talking about here. And so that's, I think, something that you're going to see a lot of updates for. Certainly, we at NVIDIA are working on our own guardrail open source toolkit to be able to help the research and the developer community to put those safety guardrails in place. There's other methods as well, such as the concept of model cards. So every large language model and every machine learning model should have a model card, which is basically a full explanation of what the model does, where it gets the data from, what it's trained on, how it's trained on, and how to manage. There's also extensions to that for things like privacy and safety, things like bias, so exposing, yes, it's a black box, but also exposing some of the weights and biases within the model to potentially identify ways that the model could impact adversely certain groups of people, right? That's another area of ongoing kind of research and a lot of conversation that's going on from the tech industry standpoint. So I think that is something that should go all the way to Congress, and Congress should work with us and the tech industry to be able to develop that public-private collaboration on things like guardrails and safety, security, and bias exposure. Now, that's assuming that they can finally elect a speaker, or they're not fighting about something else. We can actually get to talking about the things that matter, and AI is certainly one of them. So that's just my 2 cents from a more kind of enterprise commercial perspective, what I'm seeing. But it's certainly top of mind, Renata, of the things that you just talked about with the guardrails.
I'm going to give a little bit more, I think this is my own take, so this does not represent Microsoft's stance on things. So, yeah, so asterisk. I still want to go back to the fact that I think critical thinking is so important, because we have regulation, for example, around speeding. Don't go 100 miles an hour on the interstate. Sometimes people still do that. So I think it goes back to, like, how are we encouraging people to think critically about things? How are we encouraging people to not maybe take the easiest path? A good example is, I had to, at work, we had to do our quarterly sort of review ourselves, and a lot of people might seem like, I'm going to use ChatGPT to do this thing, and they put in their name, and then I got one that had this lovely intro paragraph, but all the details were not about this person, and they just didn't take the time to read. I'm like, hey, this is nice. That's not you. Please do that again. I had to write a bio for myself, and I had kind of writer's block, and so I was like, write a bio about me, and it's like, Brock Davis is engineering manager at Microsoft. He also is an artist that has clothing in Target. I'm like, I don't have clothing in Target. That's a different Brock Davis. But, like, taking the moment, like, no, that's not right, because, like, ChatGPT, for example, it's training on the internet. Well, so are a lot of people. They'll read things on the internet, and they'll say things to you, like, in person. You're like, that doesn't sound right. So I think it goes back to, like, beyond Congress and guardrails that tech can provide, but, like, are we training humans to think critically, to, like, look at this and say, that doesn't sound right, or I probably should think about these things? Because you can have the most amazing model card that says, this is how you do it, but if they don't read it or know what those words mean, then they're going to be like, I don't care, and they'll just go. The other thing I'll say is, I do personally think a lot of companies are going to self-regulate. I think about self-driving cars, the technology's there, but the risk is so high that if, say, Google releases a self-driving car and it's really good, but it has a crash, then that's done. It's gone. Stakes are too high for companies. So I think a lot of these big enterprises are going to be super duper cautious. I think the riskiest ones are, like, maybe the smaller startup ones who have less to lose, and, like, hey, let me just grab this model and that model, and then ta-da, here's the thing that's going to solve it, and someone buys it and goes into it. So I think it's going to be probably not the big scary companies that I work for, but maybe the other ones have less sort of stakes to kind of work through.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the self-driving car example because the research is ongoing. But as you guys know, whenever a Google, as you said, or Tesla have an accident with one of their self-driving cars, it's all over the news. There's lawsuits. There's all kinds of stuff, right? In the meantime, thousands of people just died on the road, right, from human error. So I think we need to put these things into perspective a little bit, and allow a little bit of flexibility there for companies to be able to do that research. That being said, because we're a 50-state country, we definitely need a regulatory framework to be able to drive those cars in different terrains, make sure that they are trained on any kind of potential data set and potential terrain. One other thing that I will say, I think privacy and confidentiality is super important, which is, by the way, why people shouldn't just put any kind of random prompt into ChatGPT, because it turns out that engineers from Samsung and AMD actually leaked some of their intellectual property because they asked questions about the schematics of their chips. And that was a cautionary tale that was told to us, and we made sure not to do it. But I think open source research and open source intelligence is very, very important. So where it gets a little dicey is when we talk about things like healthcare and the financial sector, right? Where you have regulations like HIPAA, like Sarbanes-Oxley, right? There's a lot of different things that control those industries and the privacy laws within those industries. However, I think for research purposes, it's very important that we keep supporting the existence and the development of open source data sets, right? So there's a lot of researchers out there who just go to the Stanford website. Stanford has a repository of open public data sets. Of course, there's no patient names, right? If there's a medical data set, it's going to have everything scrubbed. So there are ways to limit exposure, right, and be compliant with regulation. But I think we also shouldn't forget how important the open source community is, and keeping those data sets open and public, especially for non-commercial use. So that's something that I think the way we think about it is, we don't want to compete with open source. We don't want to provide things that would be potentially detrimental to those platforms and those repositories. So hopefully you guys also get to work with open source, and it's great.
Okay, I think we should open this up for question now. We have 2 microphones in the audience, so please feel free to use them.
Yes, as you all have already said, that there's no infrastructure to regulate the use of AI, but how do you remove cultural bias from people that have differences in learning, people that have differences in abilities, color, medical issues? How do you use AI to differentiate between those type of people, especially in the classroom?
That's an important thing, and I think that's one of my biggest concerns as we look at. I think there's a lot of advantages for AI in the classroom. We have a shortage of teachers right now, as it is, and so we've got a lot of special education classrooms, a lot of elementary school classrooms that don't have the support that they need. And I think that AI, some of the potential of AI is to fill some of those gaps and give those students that early level intervention where they can grade in real time, what students are doing, and provide, personalized feedback for that student and engage them as they go through. Conmigo is Khan Academy's big tutoring program that they have. It's a great tool for students. But my biggest concern is I don't think there's a real clear answer for that yet. I know that we have been, in our consortium, we're looking to try to get guidance from universities and people that have a lot more experience with that than we do, so that we can make sure that as we're putting these things in place, we are not, furthering any bias that we have or creating more inequity than we need to when we're trying to solve that. I think done right, AI can bridge those gaps for us, but the question is, what does that actually look like? And my biggest fear is that we're moving so fast with this, and we see the need to get, into this space and all of the advantages that it has, that we might miss the boat on that, and that we might make the mistake of introducing these things too soon for well-intended purposes, but without doing the due diligence to make sure that we are not introducing or exacerbating existing issues.
I'll just add to that. I know that Brock, I think it was you who said that the industry will most likely regulate itself. And I think I don't necessarily agree with that. Or, I'm not sure that the industries will be talking to policymakers and to government officials enough to create something that's equitable for everyone. That's one of my biggest concerns. So I do share your concern, and I'm not sure how it will play out. The second thing is, I think your question goes back to Suranga's original question about access and equitable access. So we know there's already a digital divide between, in particular, traditionally underserved students and well-served students. And so how do we prevent that from furthering any kind of opportunity gap? And I think as educators, that's something that we need to deal with front and center. So I'm glad to hear that, school K, or at least high schools, are already thinking about that. And I think, higher ed institutions are as well.
I think the other thing that'll be important, so there's kind of two parts to it, right? There's how do we make sure that people from all backgrounds and all ways of thinking can use these tools? And so I know, like, some companies, this is where I put on my Microsoft hat and say, yay, Microsoft. We offer a lot of free training for people so they can get certified in how to use AI tools and AI in the cloud. But there's also, I think, a responsibility on the university and research side that you open up and have studies, and this is where government comes in to provide funding so that you can make sure that the models that are being used in AI include a vast majority of people from different backgrounds, and then where you have funding to kind of make sure that there's no disparities and gaps in the K-12 system and beyond. And one clarification, I think industry is going to self-limit, not regulate, meaning that they're going to pump the brakes probably more than they should because they're afraid of news stories of we did this thing. May not be, massive problem in the scale of things, but bad PR can tank things. So I think they're going to be, the technology will be there sooner than it actually gets released because of industry self-limiting, rolling it out. But I do agree that it needs to be there does need to be some regulatory sort of things around it to make sure that things don't. And I think you're seeing that a little bit with companies saying, "Hey, we have this thing," and a month later, we should probably have some guardrails because it's learning and it's going faster than they initially thought. And uh-oh. So I do think that there is definitely a sense of urgency within industry to kind of figure out what's the right way. But yeah, back to the main point, I think it's two parts. How do we make sure people can get trained on how to use it? And how do we make sure that the tools that we put out there are informed by people from different backgrounds?
And I'll just say as well, I think we need to think about that question on the data level. How do we reflect people's experiences, right? People's diverse experiences onto the data that's being fed into an AI model, right? Anything from, there's lots of ideas there, but anything from, I always think about data labeling, right? A lot of companies use labelers from all over the world, right? How do we make sure that those labelers are representative, right, of our society and can also provide their own input, right? Instead of just being there and classifying and labeling images, right? What if they don't agree, right, with a certain part of the data set, right? Because it impacts them adversely. So all these things, I think, we're a little bit, slow on, but it's definitely something that we're thinking about.
I agree. I was going to say that about the data. We need people on the back end who are creating the data, who have a diverse background that can pick some of these things out. So that's a workforce training issue. And we need data sets that are really reflective of the population as a whole, which we don't really have or have any ability to know in these backgrounds, unless you go to the company and say, Khan Academy, what data did you put into your training and show it to me, and you feel comfortable evaluating whether it was biased or not, they don't have to show you that.
Okay, I think we can get a question there.
Yeah, I'm just curious, you touched on it a little bit, but I think, from my understanding, that intellectual property is a big piece of this puzzle too. Not just from the making sure that you're not, disseminating your private information or, those kinds of things. Sorry. So I was just asking about intellectual property. And certainly it applies to each part of your work, because who owns the data to begin with? Where is it coming from? If it's being scraped off the internet, who's the originator? And so I'm just curious if you guys could speak about that a little bit, or if that's come up in your experiences. Thanks.
So I could say specifically from my actual work, like within gaming, the way we handle that is they say, don't use AI in your work and just stay away from it. So we don't use, like within Minecraft, we don't use like any of those things. So router software, I mean, the closest we get to is using AI to, like I said, analyze the data we have in-house. Like that's the data that we collect. And it's like, but we don't use like models that scrape things off the internet. We don't use like anything that we put into the game has to be like created from within. So we don't, we might use things as starting points to kind of get started on stuff, but nothing goes into the game that is like a generated thing from some sort of system, whether it's internal or not. We don't even use our own internal AI big things like within Minecraft to kind of, until people figure out who are smarter than me and like my boss and my boss's boss, to like, what do we do there? Like, so for right now, we're kind of just, we don't know, which is not a great answer, but it's.
One other thing I will say is, again, back to what I was saying about Samsung and AMD engineers putting stuff into ChatGPT, just, I would say, avoid feeding the algorithm something that you don't want it to steal. Right.
Well, there's an enterprise one that's just within our data center.
Right.
We can use with the public one because it's still, it's sending, yeah, it's complicated. Which is why
But
our organization said, no.
Right. Is that increasing the bias because there's not enough data sets inclusively to make that? That's how I'm curious. It's hard.
yeah, and our legal teams are actively working on these things. We use service level agreements known as EULAs for our own software. So whenever we have a customer who's using our software, for example, or part of our software stack, they always have to sign this agreement called a EULA, and it sets the standards of what they can do and how they can use the software. Now, if somebody downloads it out from a torrent, right, and they start using a software that's supposed to be gated, there's really no way for us today to limit that, unfortunately. If we find it, we can, pursue legal action. But I think for the most part, those legally binding agreements are what we're using right now.
I think the thing to kind of point out is the problem, or the question you're asking, that problem already existed with people just like taking stuff, someone else's work and copying it. Now it's just at a much larger scale, right? So it's, but that problem wasn't solved before. It's kind of, it's a game of whack-a-mole. Is it the EULAs you have in place? Is it your legal department putting the correct policies? Like it's just, as computing gets faster, we have more energy efficient, and then we have these larger things, and the problems can kind of get bigger and faster, which is why I think you see the executive order that came out, and why you see some of these things and these companies coming forward and saying, actually, I think we do need some regulation because this is going faster than we maybe initially thought it would. So, yeah, it's a tough problem. I don't think there's any one answer yet.
Yeah, I think we can take a question this side.
Ah, cool. I thought about the use of generative or artificial intelligence in the school system. So one was mentioned, the gentleman with the green shirt mentioned that you could use AI to grade. I would actually think that would be counterproductive. One of the ways that I was able to catch, I'm a former high school teacher and done a whole bunch of stuff. But one of the ways I was able to catch cheating often was if I'm listening to your conversations, if I'm looking at your notes, if I'm doing a notebook check, or if you stay after school, or if I see how you behave in class, then all of a sudden you're Rembrandt when it comes to, I mean, I'm just joking with the Rembrandt thing, that's clearly an art joke, as opposed to, you know, mathematics or generating an essay, then that was a way of identifying. The other thing I thought about is, as the principal mentioned, kind of using AI, and you also mentioned it as well. Forget your name in the green shirt.
Konstantin.
The NVIDIA gentleman. Huh?
Konstantin.
Konstantin. Cool. So Konstantin, you mentioned how, you know, if we had like a Cherokee chat GPT or Fulton chat GPT. So my point in mentioning all of this is to say, has any consideration been placed on using AI to maybe, you know, poll community data and then have that to maybe tailor either instructional strategies within the school or even curriculum development for certain needs within that community? So that could be, you know, prediction, that could be pattern model, you know, all of those type of things. So has that ever come across as an idea, or do I need to say that that's mine?
I think
that's
you just
mine?
invented it. You know, you should totally go for it. Well, I'll let the principal and the policymakers comment, but I think from my perspective, I think it's very interesting what you just said about the input, right? Because, okay, we can provide tooling, we can build tooling for high schools and for community colleges, but I think the input coming from the community that's the most impacted by that school system, I think it's certainly something that I, you know, now that I think about it, it sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I don't think I want to speak on the community input, but it does sound like a great idea. I wanted to go back to what you said about the old school way of catching students cheating. When you first said that, I thought about a situation that my high school daughter just faced literally 2 days ago. Her teacher ran her essay through an AI detection tool, and it came back basically 99% AI generated. And, you know, and it wasn't. She admitted to me, she didn't tell the teacher this, but she admitted to me, only my thesis statement was AI generated, and I wrote the rest of the essay. And you could tell it was her language. You know, I know how she writes, and so it was her syntax. Mm-hmm. But I just wonder, like, are the AI detection tools keeping up with the pace of AI use and generation? And if not, then that leaves us in a really bad situation.
And I have a thought on that. They are not keeping up at all. And you know, and this is always one of those things where kids they spend so much time thinking about how to get by with cheating that you're like, come on, just spend that effort on the front end and you'll be great. You're going to do great. But it's an ongoing issue. I mean, this is it's kind of a game of whack-a-mole where you're trying to figure that out. But so I think that this speaks to, so Innovation Academy is a next-gen school like we're all about the application of knowledge. So I have a bias for this. But I think, and our philosophy is that, like, if this is a systemic problem where students are cheating because they're chasing these tests, there's an underlying problem. They are playing the game of school, and they're playing it really well by getting by with those things. So these are, you know, students are passionate about things, and we have to figure out ways to engage with that. And AI is a great tool for this. You know, the idea that your daughter got a thesis statement from ChatGPT I was a former English teacher, doesn't bother me at all. I think that's a great place to start. It's an idea starter. You still have to evaluate if that's the one that you want to use. If you have evidence to support it, you have to build out, you know, and synthesize all of the different sources that you bring in. So all of those skills are still really valuable. So the question is, why are we putting them in situations where the easiest way out is for them to copy something out of ChatGPT? I will also say, so for the catching, I do think that AI is probably going to catch up with the cheating on those larger scales. Not necessarily this, but being able to, once we have systems where I have a pattern that I can recognize for a given student, you can then see that, and maybe that the AI can catch that. But I think in the interim, I mean, you still need the human in the loop. For the foreseeable future, you got to have this, the person in the loop. So like for coding, like I would always see kids that would write code and their codes looked like they never understood anything in any of the lectures, but then their code looked like some expert on Stack Overflow. It was amazing. They're doing incredible work. So, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Exactly. So that's so then again, but the question is, why are we putting them in those situations where that's the outcome? Partially because we have a school system that values the knowledge and not the process. So we ask for them to give me the right answer, and that's what the grade is based on rather than the process. And that's a really complicated thing to do, but AI, especially, one of the things I think is so incredible about it is it can offload that early work. Teacher or students never want to say to a teacher, and I would say this is probably true in industry, you never want to say to your boss, I don't have the answer for this. But it's really easy for me to tell ChatGPT I'm an idiot about something and need its help, because I know, other than it showing up, some data set later on, nobody's going to know that was me. And so that gives students the potential to fail and to push forward through those things and to kind of learn iteratively. So I don't think that there's an easy answer for this. The community data, I like, once you bring that to market, will you please come back and meet with me? Because I think that would be a really valuable thing.
Cool.
See.
Just as a response, it made me think of it when you were saying it. The personalized student experience, where you kind of take the grade, I would right now just be hesitant of trying to say put together this is going to show my bias because I'm going to say a profile of a child, and then trying to base the grade on whether it matches that profile, because it, like, God forbid you have a late bloomer where they don't do well at first and then they get better. They get tutoring outside of school and get better. Now the profile doesn't match, right? And if no one's going back to check it, or you have an A student and something happens at home and now they're bad, so I would just want so much for people to not black box it like that, but to definitely have educators and people, social workers, and other things in the loop to make sure that those things didn't just auto occur.
Okay, let's get a question from that.
I have a very different question. So I don't know if you guys had an opportunity to see the Noema article that posited that these are early frontier, the large language models we have right now are early frontier models of artificial general intelligence. And one of the things that they're giving us as evidence of that is, for example, they didn't teach ChatGPT Farsi, but ChatGPT knows Farsi. So, so they're saying that this is our first example of artificial general intelligence. And these are not like, these are pretty hefty guys that are saying this. So when they published this article last week, it kind of, put a wave in the time-space continuum of AI. So I'm wondering what you're thinking about artificial general intelligence, how soon it's probably going to be upon us, and what you think that's going to mean for the future of education.
Wow, that's a big question. I know. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways. I've heard a lot of different views on where it can go, from very optimistic and saying it can kind of help save us in some of the ways, all the way to very, apocalyptic, where, people, and I think there's a range in between. And I would say, for me, any new tool that is, the more powerful the tool, we will still always and forever be stuck with human nature, right? And AI does not change that. It doesn't change human nature. And human nature can be fantastic, and human nature can be terrible. And so I think we will have some mix of that, and whether and how fast it's coming. I think it's in some places it's here, in some places it's just being discussed and really is 30, 40, 50 years out. You know, every community is different. You know, it's kind of this, we're working at the speed of trust, and the speed of trust is slow, and the speed of trust is different in different communities.
My thoughts are different based on what you said. I was gonna say, I think, I do think that it's gonna be here sooner than maybe some folks think. And I think, again, that's why you see industry rushing, like, hey, we should probably do something about this. But I also don't see, so AI to me is, I read a lot of history books, and I think you made the comment how people are slow to change, and like you just said, human nature is not going to change much. And I don't really see AI much different than like the internet revolution, other than it's faster and bigger, but the concept's the same. There's this idea, and it's going to make everything amazing because we can share information so quickly. And there has been some really amazing things because of it, but there's also been some really, really bad things because of it. I don't think AI is that different. I think it's just, my hope is that we learn from past like technological revolutions and get ahead of some of those things. My personal take on it is that what this ends up playing out like is we have super helpful assistants that can connect a bunch of things that we do so it can free up our time to do more complicated things. But there will always be probably bad actors doing some nefarious things, and we just have to, be cognizant of that and be aware of that. But as far as timing, I think you made a perfect point. In some areas, it's already here. Some areas, it's got a long way to go. So.
And I'll say in some areas, AI is so necessary, right? We don't have enough doctors, you guys, on a global level, right? There are so many communities that are medically underserved in the world. And if you think about the potential of, you mentioned general artificial intelligence, but specifically in the medical space, right? Having access to millions and millions and millions of X-rays and CAT scans, right, and medical data to really teach it, and also medical experience, right, case studies, all of that, being able to do things like early cancer detection, right, on a patient that lives in a rural community, right, let's say in southern India, without having to drive for 2 days to go and see a doctor, right? And then that same AI system actually prescribing a treatment plan, and not only a treatment plan, but the best, most efficient treatment plan based on all the data that it knows from 100 years of history, right? Or however long we go back to trying to tackle cancer. So I think in some ways the leading researcher institutions are I would say almost there. I think about Mayo Clinic is a big partner of ours. We're very, very early on doing that whole cancer, early cancer prediction and diagnosis with AI. They have done some incredible research. So I would say, for you guys as researchers, this is going to be on you, right? This is your arena. You will be the ones building it. You will be the ones controlling it. You'll be the ones running it. So we're looking to you, right, to create that positive change. So let's build AIs that make a difference for fields that really, really need it, like healthcare, because that's one that we think about a lot, because it's not enough, right? How many years does it take to train a doctor, right? To get out of medical school? Well, we can multiply that effort. So.
Okay, I think we are already out of time, but we have one more question because it's the last question. Go ahead.
In my limited study of psychology, it seemed to me that the idea of what intelligence is at its core is still not well settled. So that would present a barrier for someone trying to intentionally create an AGI, because one wouldn't know what to mimic or maximize in that process. So piggybacking off of Suranga's earlier question, how do you all personally define intelligence?
We came to square one again.
That's science.
High IQ mixed in with some EQ.
What he said. There you go.
Yeah, I think it's very narrowly defined in how we're thinking about AI right now in that context. They're really thinking about like those senses that we're mimicking. But yeah, overall, yeah, being able to think intelligent, but also being able to interact with people. Yeah, you know, we are social creatures. And so that's a form of intelligence that they've found in studies gets you a lot farther in life than just technical intelligence. There's some geniuses, very awkward, and don't become president.
I would add to that, I'm a big social, emotional intelligence person. And so I think the soft skills that AI won't be able to replicate is partially how I define intelligence. So creativity, criticality, empathy. I mean, these are skills that I think make someone fully more well-rounded in terms of their intelligence. That's a great question.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It makes me very nervous because I don't have the full answer for it. But so I think all of this, you know, to me, intelligence is somebody's ability to interpret the world around them, act upon that world, and influence it, which encompasses all of this. And I will. What's so interesting is I think so. We're saying, you know, that computers can't do this. I don't know how long that's true. You know, this is the ramp for this is really unknown and what the growth rate is going to be. So when we speak to AGI, you know, maybe there's a point when we don't have an educator or we don't need an educational system for the things that we do. But I still think it comes back to being human. And so we're still going to want to influence and act upon and understand the world around us. And so, you know, to speak to the other question too about what we do as an educator or in education, if that were to happen, I think we still do that. We still try to work with our kids to be the best humans that they can be in whatever world they're in around them, whether that's, you know, a world filled with AGI or, you know, Chat GPT knockoffs. We'll see.
I think that's great discussion. I think to add, I really like that answer, IQ plus EQ. If you can get both high, then that's going to be really superhuman. So with that, I think I would like to thank you, everyone. It's a great discussion. Let's give them a